Hands on the wheel now." The officer's gun trembled inches from his face. Marcus Bennett's children screamed in the back seat as metal cuffs bit into his wrists. Cameras captured everything a black man in an expensive car treated like a criminal. But within an hour, the officer's face would drain of all color. Because the suspect he just brutalized wasn't a thief. He was the governor of Georgia. Stay until the end of this story and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this truth has traveled. The first light of dawn crept through the windows of the governor's mansion in Atlanta, painting the walls in shades of gold and amber. Marcus Bennett stood at the window of his bedroom, coffee in hand, watching the sun rise over the city he'd sworn to serve. At 48 years old, he carried himself with the quiet dignity of a man who'd earned every inch of his position, not through privilege, but through decades of fighting for justice in courtrooms, community centers, and finally, the halls of power. "You're actually going through with this." Tanya Bennett emerged from the bathroom, her silk robe flowing behind her. Even after 20 years of marriage, Marcus still felt his breath catch when he looked at her. She was his anchor, his truth-teller, the woman who'd stood beside him through every campaign, every crisis, every lonely night when the weight of leadership felt too heavy to bear. Marcus turned from the window, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Going through with what spending a Saturday morning with my family. Since when did that become a crime?" Tanya crossed her arms, but her eyes softened. "Marcus, you know what I mean. You're the governor. You have a security detail for a reason. The twins' science fair is at a public school. There'll be crowds, media." "Exactly." Marcus interrupted gently, setting down his coffee and walking to her. He took both her hands in his. "It's a science fair, Tanya. Our babies worked for months on their solar panel project. I'm not showing up in a motorcade with armed guards and turning their big day into a political circus. For once, just once, I want to be Marcus Bennett, proud dad, not Governor Bennett, public official." Tanya searched his face, seeing the determination there, but also something else, a weariness that no amount of sleep could cure. "You carry the weight of the world on your shoulders every single day," she said softly. "You're allowed to let someone else drive, literally and figuratively." "I know," Marcus said, pulling her close. "But today, I need to be normal. I need our kids to see me as their father first." "Is that so wrong?" From down the hallway, the sound of thundering footsteps and excited voices shattered the morning quiet. 12-year-old twins Jordan and Maya burst into the room, Jordan carrying a modified cardboard display board, while Maya clutched a carefully wrapped solar panel array. "Dad, Mom, we need to leave in 20 minutes. Jordan's voice cracked with preteen anxiety. "Mrs. Henderson said judging starts at 9 sharp, and if we're late, we won't be late," Marcus assured him, ruffling his son's close-cropped hair. "I promise, your old man's going to get you there with time to spare." Maya looked up at her father with wide, hopeful eyes. "You're really driving us yourself. No security cars." Marcus knelt down to his daughter's level. "Really and truly. Just you, me, your brother and Mom. Like a regular family." "We're not a regular family, though," Maya said with the blunt honesty only a 12-year-old could muster. "You're the governor. Everybody knows who you are." Marcus felt his heart squeeze. "I'm your dad first, Maya. Always. Don't you ever forget that." 30 minutes later, Marcus slid behind the wheel of his personal vehicle, a sleek black Audi A8, that he'd bought 3 years ago before his election. It was one of the few things he'd kept from his previous life as a civil rights attorney. Tanya settled into the passenger seat while Jordan and Maya buckled in behind them, their science project carefully secured. "Ready?" Marcus asked, catching his children's eyes in the rearview mirror. "Born ready." Jordan grinned, his nervousness transforming into excitement. As they pulled out of the mansion's private driveway, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in months: freedom. No security briefings, no aides hovering with urgent messages, no carefully choreographed photo opportunities. Just the open road, his family's laughter, and the promise of a normal Saturday morning. If only he'd known that normal was about to be shattered beyond recognition. Across town, in a neighborhood where the houses were smaller and the streets were quieter. Officer Brian Reynolds sat in his patrol car, staring at his smartphone with barely contained rage. The news article on his screen made his jaw clench. Governor Bennett announces new police oversight committee, claims current system lacks accountability. Lacks accountability, Brian muttered bitterly, tossing his phone onto the passenger seat. We're out here risking our lives every damn day, and these politicians want to Monday morning quarterback every decision we make. At 42, Brian Reynolds had been with the Atlanta Police Department for 18 years. He'd started young, idealistic, believing he was joining a brotherhood dedicated to protecting and serving. But somewhere along the way, through budget cuts, public criticism, and a justice system, he saw as too lenient that idealism had curdled into resentment. And lately, that resentment had found a convenient target. His partner, Officer Jennifer Martinez, climbed into the passenger seat with 2 coffee cups. "You're brooding again," she observed, handing him one. "Did you read this?" Brian gestured at his phone. Bennett wants to put civilians on review boards. Civilians who've never worn the badge, never faced down a suspect, never had to make a split-second decision that could mean life or death. And they're going to judge us. Jennifer sighed, taking a sip of her coffee. "Brian, I know you're frustrated, but maybe some oversight isn't—" "Whose side are you on?" Brian's voice sharpened. "There are no sides," Jennifer said firmly. "There's just the job. And the job is getting harder because people don't trust us anymore. Maybe some of that's on us to fix." Brian started the engine without responding. He'd heard this lecture before from Jennifer, from the department psychologist, from the new chief, who talked endlessly about community policing and de-escalation. To Brian, it was all soft, politically correct nonsense that ignored the reality of the streets. As they pulled out of the parking lot, Brian's eyes scanned the neighborhood with practiced suspicion. His gaze landed on a black Audi A8, stopped at a red light 3 cars ahead. Something about it triggered his instincts, or perhaps his prejudices. "Nice car for this neighborhood," he muttered. Jennifer glanced at it. "It's a nice car, period. So what?" Brian's eyes narrowed as the light changed and the Audi moved forward. Through the rear window, he could see the silhouettes of what appeared to be a family, adults in front, kids in back. But it was the driver who held his attention. Even from this distance, he could see dark skin, a proud bearing. "Tags partially obscured," Brian said, though Jennifer could see perfectly well that it wasn't. Brian don't. But he was already flipping on the lights. Marcus was in the middle of a story, recounting the time he'd accidentally set off the fire alarm during his own high school science fair when the flash of red and blue lights filled his rearview mirror. His words died mid-sentence. "Marcus." Tanya's voice held a note of concern. "It's fine," Marcus said automatically, though his hands had already begun the familiar routine that every black man in America learns early. Turn signal on slowdown, carefully. Pull to the right windows, down hands visible. Don't make sudden movements. "Dad?" Maya's small voice came from the back seat. "Why are we being stopped?" "Probably just a tail light or something." "Sweetheart?" Marcus said, keeping his tone light even as his heart rate accelerated. "Nothing to worry about." But he was worried. Despite his position, despite his power, despite everything he'd accomplished, Marcus Bennett knew that to some people, he'd never be anything more than a black man in an expensive car, and that was dangerous. Through his side mirror, he watched the officer approach a white man in his early 40s, hand resting on his service weapon, face set in hard lines of suspicion. Marcus's attorney instincts kicked in immediately, cataloging details. Aggressive posture, defensive stance, eyes already judging before any interaction had occurred. The officer tapped on the window with unnecessary force. License and registration, now. Marcus kept his hands on the wheel visible. Good morning, officer. I'm going to reach for my wallet now. It's in my inside jacket pocket. My registration is in the glove compartment. Just do it slowly. The officer, his name tag read. Reynolds set his hand still on his weapon. Dad, you didn't do anything wrong, Jordan protested from the back seat. It's okay, son, Marcus said calmly, slowly reaching for his license. We're just cooperating with the officer. Tanya opened the glove compartment with equally deliberate movements, extracting the registration and insurance documents. Marcus handed everything over his hands steady, even though his mind was racing. Should he identify himself immediately, or would that seem like he was pulling rank, escalating the situation? Reynolds took the documents, his eyes scanning them with exaggerated suspicion. This your car, Mr. He glanced at the license. Bennett. Yes, sir, it is. Seems pretty expensive. What do you do for a living? Marcus felt Tanya's hand find his on the center console, a silent warning. Stay calm. I work for the state of Georgia, he said carefully. Doing what exactly? I'm in public service. Reynolds' eyes narrowed. That's pretty vague. Public service doesn't usually pay for Audis. You mind stepping out of the vehicle? Officer, may I ask why I was pulled over? Marcus kept his voice professional neutral. Your tag was obscured. It's not obscured, officer, Tanya interjected. We can all see it clearly. Reynolds' face flushed. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step out as well. In fact, everyone out of the vehicle. Officer Reynolds, is that really necessary? A second voice came from behind them. The female officer Martinez, according to her tag, had approached on the passenger side. The registration checks out, the license is valid. I said everyone out, Reynolds snapped. Maya started crying softly. Jordan put his arm around his sister. Marcus felt a cold fury building in his chest, but he kept it locked down. Anger would only make this worse. Sir, my children are frightened, Marcus said quietly. If there's an issue with my documentation, I'm happy to address it. But there's no need to. I'll decide what's necessary. Reynolds' hand moved to his handcuffs. Now either you step out voluntarily, or I'll remove you forcibly for obstruction. The situation was spiraling. Marcus could see it happening, could feel the terrible momentum of prejudice and power combining into something dangerous. Around them, other cars had slowed down. People were watching. Some were holding up phones recording. Daddy, please let's just go home, Maya sobbed. Marcus unbuckled his seatbelt. It's going to be okay, baby girl. Your dad's going to handle this. He opened the door slowly, keeping his hands visible. As he stood, his tall frame, 6'3", seemed to unnerve Reynolds further. The officer's hand went to his gun again. Hands on the hood. Now. Officer, this is, Marcus began. Hands on the hood. Marcus complied, spreading his hands on the warm metal of his car. He could hear Tanya pleading. Please, our children are watching. Please don't do this. Reynolds kicked Marcus's feet apart, roughly patting him down with aggressive force. What else you got in this car? Drugs, weapons, stolen goods. This is profiling, Marcus said quietly. You pulled me over without cause, you're searching me without probable cause, and you're doing it in front of my children. You got a smart mouth for a suspect, Reynolds growled. I'm not a suspect. I'm a citizen who's been illegally detained. The words came out sharper than Marcus intended. Reynolds' face went scarlet with rage. In one swift movement, he grabbed Marcus's wrist and twisted it behind his back. You're under arrest for obstruction and resisting. He's not resisting, Tanya screamed. He hasn't resisted anything. Ma'am, get back in the vehicle, Martinez ordered, trying to control the situation. But it was too late. More patrol cars were arriving, drawn by the commotion. Jordan had his phone out filming. Other bystanders were doing the same. The morning sun beat down on the scene as Marcus Bennett, governor, father, public servant, felt the cold metal of handcuffs bite into his wrists. Brian, stop. Martinez hissed urgently. Look at him. Really look. But Reynolds was beyond listening. The adrenaline, the anger, the deep-seated prejudice, it had all combined into a toxic cocktail that made him blind to everything except his own narrative: dangerous black man in expensive car equals criminal. You have the right to remain silent, Reynolds began. Officer, I need you to listen to me very carefully, Marcus said, his voice still controlled, despite the humiliation burning through him. I am Marcus Bennett. I am the governor of this state. You are making a catastrophic mistake. Reynolds barked out a laugh. Sure you are. And I'm the president. Try another story. Brian. Martinez grabbed her partner's arm. Check his license again. Look at it. Reynolds pulled out the license, glancing at it dismissively. Then his eyes widened. The color started to drain from his face. No, he whispered. No, this is... You can't... A black SUV came to a screeching halt beside them. Captain Diane Harris, a 25-year veteran of the force, and someone who'd actually met the governor on multiple occasions, jumped out. What in the hell is going on here? She demanded. Then she saw Marcus handcuffed against his own car, and her face went pale. Oh my God! Governor Bennett! The scene froze. Marcus could see the realization spreading like wildfire through the gathered officers. Reynolds staggered backward, his hands shaking. I didn't... The car... He didn't identify. I'm standing here in handcuffs, Captain Harris, Marcus said, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. In front of my wife, in front of my children, on our way to their school science fair. And I'd very much like to know what law I've broken. Captain Harris moved quickly, unlocking the handcuffs herself. Governor, I cannot apologize enough. Don't apologize to me, Marcus said, rubbing his wrists. The skin was already showing red marks where the cuffs had bitten too tight. Apologize to my 12-year-old daughter who just watched her father, the governor of this state, be treated like a criminal for the crime of driving while black. The silence that followed was deafening. Turn off those cameras, Reynolds suddenly shouted at the bystanders, his voice cracking with panic. You can't film this? They absolutely can, Marcus said coldly. This is a public street, and this is America. They have every right to document what just happened here. Tanya had gotten out of the car and wrapped her arms around both children. Maya was still crying. Jordan's face was set in angry lines that made him look far older than 12. Daddy didn't do anything wrong, Jordan said to Captain Harris, his voice shaking. The officer just saw him and assumed. I know, son, Marcus said, gently pulling his family close. I know exactly what he assumed. Governor Bennett, Captain Harris tried again. If you'll allow me to escort you to your destination. No. Marcus's voice was firm. We're going to drive ourselves just like we planned. But Captain, I expect a full report on my desk Monday morning. Officer Reynolds, you'll be hearing from my office very soon. Reynolds looked like he might be sick. His career, his pension, his entire future, he could see it all crumbling. I was just doing my job, he said weakly. Marcus turned to face him fully. Your job is to protect and serve. Tell me, Officer Reynolds, who were you protecting when you handcuffed an innocent man? Who were you serving when you traumatized 2 children? Your job is not to judge people by the color of their skin or the car they drive, but you did, and now you'll face the consequences. He helped Tanya and the children back into the car. His hands were steady as he started the engine, but inside a storm was building. Years of similar experiences pulled over, followed in stores, questioned in his own neighborhood, all came flooding back. But this time was different. This time his children had seen it. This time, the whole world would see it. As they drove away, leaving the cluster of police cars behind, Maya whispered, "Are you okay, Daddy?" Marcus looked in the rearview mirror at his daughter's tear-stained face. I will be baby girl. We all will be. But even as he said it, he knew nothing would ever be quite the same again. By the time they reached the school, Marcus had composed himself. The science fair couldn't be ruined. His children had worked too hard for that. He plastered on a smile, shook hands with teachers, admired projects alongside other parents. If anyone noticed the red marks still visible on his wrists, they didn't comment. If they wondered why the governor had arrived without his usual security detail, they didn't ask. Jordan and Maya's solar panel project won second place. Marcus cheered louder than any other parent in the gymnasium. But when Maya ran to hug him, clutching her ribbon, she whispered in his ear, "You don't have to pretend for us, Daddy. We know you're hurting." Smart girl. Too smart for her own good sometimes. The first video hit social media before they'd even left the school. Someone had posted it with the caption, "Watch Georgia governor handcuffed and searched at traffic stop, cop didn't recognize him." By the time they got home, it had 50,000 views. By dinner, 5 million. By midnight, the story had gone national. Marcus's phone rang constantly. His chief of staff, the attorney general, the mayor of Atlanta, the president's senior advisor. Everyone wanted a statement, wanted to know his next move, wanted to control the narrative. But Marcus sat in his home office door, locked, watching the video on repeat. Watching himself be treated like a criminal. Watching his daughter cry. Watching his son's face transform from innocent boy to angry young black man who'd just learned a brutal lesson about America. There was a soft knock on the door. "Marcus?" Tanya's voice. "You need to eat something." "I'm not hungry." "I'm coming in anyway." She entered with a sandwich she knew he wouldn't touch and sat beside him on the couch. For a long moment, they just sat together in silence. 20 years of marriage, meaning they didn't always need words. "What are you thinking?" she finally asked. "I'm thinking," Marcus said slowly, "that I've spent my entire career fighting for justice. I've argued cases before the Supreme Court. I've written legislation. I've given speeches about equality and civil rights. And none of it mattered this morning. None of it protected me or my family from a racist cop who saw only my skin color." "So what are you going to do?" Marcus looked at his wife. This brilliant woman who'd always seen him more clearly than he saw himself. "I'm going to make sure this never happens to anyone else. Not to our children. Not to any children." "That's a big promise." "I'm the governor. If I can't change things, who can?" Tanya took his hand, interlacing their fingers. "Then change things. But Marcus, don't let anger guide you. Let justice guide you." He nodded, feeling the weight of what lay ahead. The political battles, the resistance, the accusations that he was being too sensitive, playing the race card, dividing rather than uniting. Let them come, he thought. Because one thing was certain. The man who'd woken up that morning wanting one normal day with his family was gone. In his place was a governor with a mission and nothing left to lose. As the night deepened, and the video continued to spread across the internet like wildfire, Marcus Bennett began to draft the legislation that would define his legacy. The Public Safety and Accountability Act. It would be comprehensive, unflinching, and radical. It would challenge every comfortable assumption about policing in America. It would face massive opposition. And it would be worth every fight. Because somewhere across the state, there were other fathers, other families who deserved to drive to a science fair without fear. Who deserved to exist in their own skin without being seen as a threat. Marcus wrote until dawn, until his eyes burned and his fingers cramped, until the words on the screen began to blur into a vision of the future he was determined to create. Outside, the world was waking up to the video. The outrage was building. The reckoning was coming. And Officer Brian Reynolds, sitting alone in his dark apartment refreshing social media obsessively, was beginning to understand that his life would never be the same either. The collision between power and prejudice had happened. Now came the aftermath, and it would shake Georgia to its foundations. The sun had barely risen on Sunday morning when Marcus's chief of staff, Patricia Chen, arrived at the governor's mansion with 3 overstuffed briefings folders and a face that hadn't seen sleep in 24 hours. "It's everywhere," she said, without preamble, spreading newspapers across the dining room table. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution's front page showed Marcus in handcuffs, his face a mask of controlled dignity, while his daughter's crying face was visible through the car window. The headline screamed, "Governor handcuffed traffic stop exposes racial profiling crisis." Marcus stared at the image of his daughter's tears. How many views now? 42 million across all platforms, Patricia said quietly. It's trending #1 worldwide. The hashtag #JusticeForBennett has over 300,000 posts. Governor, the calls haven't stopped. Every major news network wants an interview. The NAACP-ACLU Congressional Black Caucus, they're all demanding statements. And, she hesitated, the police union is already releasing their own narrative. Let me guess, Tanya said, appearing in the doorway with coffee. Reynolds was just doing his job. The governor was uncooperative. They're the real victims here. Patricia nodded grimly. President of the Fraternal Order of Police went on Fox News last night, said if you'd just identified yourself immediately, none of this would have happened. Marcus felt his jaw clench. I shouldn't have to identify myself as governor to be treated with basic human dignity. That's the entire point. I know that, sir, but they're spinning it. Reynolds gave an interview to the Atlanta Herald. He's claiming he feared for his safety that you matched the description of a suspect in a recent carjacking. What carjacking? Marcus's voice sharpened. There was no carjacking. He's fabricating probable cause after the fact. Which is why we need to get ahead of this story, Patricia urged. CBS wants you for 60 minutes. CNN is offering prime time. We need your voice out there. Marcus stood and walked to the window, looking out over the manicured grounds of the mansion. Somewhere beyond these gates, the state he'd sworn to serve was having a reckoning. The question was whether he'd lead that conversation or let others control it. No interviews, he said finally. Not yet. Sir, I'm not going to turn my family's trauma into a media spectacle. I'm not going to let networks profit off my daughter's tears. He turned back to face them. But I am going to act. The Public Safety and Accountability Act. I worked on it all night. I want it introduced in the state legislature by end of week. Patricia's eyes widened. End of week, Marcus, legislation like this takes months of committee work, stakeholder meetings. We don't have months. Every day we wait, this happens to someone else. Someone without a platform. Someone whose video doesn't go viral. Someone who ends up dead instead of just humiliated. Tanya set down her coffee cup. He's right, Patricia. Strike while the iron is hot. The public support is there right now. Use it. Patricia pulled out a tablet, already shifting into tactical mode. Okay. What are we looking at? Body cameras. Mandatory statewide with footage released within 48 hours of any incident, Marcus said. Independent civilian review boards with actual authority to investigate and discipline. Ban on racial profiling written into department policies. De-escalation training. Mental health support for officers. And, he paused, knowing this would be the most controversial part, qualified immunity reform. The room went silent. Qualified immunity, the legal doctrine that protected police officers from civil lawsuits, was the third rail of police reform. Touch it, and every law enforcement union in the country would come down on you like a hammer. They'll fight you with everything they have, Patricia warned. Let them fight. I'll fight harder. Across town, in a modest 2-bedroom apartment that smelled of stale beer and desperation, Brian Reynolds sat in his boxer shorts, scrolling through his phone with shaking hands. The comments on the video were brutal. This racist cop should be in prison. How many other innocent people has he brutalized? Badge number 4729, remember this face? This is what systemic racism looks like. Someone had already found his home address and posted it online. His phone number, his ex-wife's name. Even his mother's Facebook page was being flooded with angry messages. A knock at his door made him jump. He crept to the peephole and saw Jennifer Martinez standing in the hallway, still in civilian clothes. "Brian, open up. I know you're in there." He considered ignoring her, but she knocked again louder. Reluctantly, he unlocked the door. Jennifer pushed past him into the apartment, wrinkling her nose at the mess. Empty bottles on the coffee table, pizza boxes stacked in the corner, the curtains drawn against the daylight. "You look like hell," she said bluntly. "Thanks for the pep talk." Brian slumped onto the couch. "Did you come here just to rub it in?" "I came to make sure you're not doing anything stupid." Jennifer's eyes went to the service weapon on his kitchen counter. "Brian, talk to me." "What do you want me to say?" His voice cracked. "That I screwed up, that I ruined my career, that the entire country thinks I'm a monster." "Are you a monster?" The question hung in the air. Brian wanted to shout no, to defend himself, to explain that he'd just been doing his job, following his training, acting on his instincts. But the video played in his mind on repeat. The way he'd grabbed Marcus's wrist, the fear in those children's eyes, the casual cruelty of his assumptions. "I didn't know he was the governor," Brian said weakly. "Would it have mattered if he was just a regular guy?" Jennifer asked. "Would it have been okay then? He was driving an $80,000 car in a neighborhood where the median income is—" "Stop!" Jennifer cut him off. "Just stop. Do you hear yourself? You're still justifying it. You pulled him over because he was black. Everything after that was you trying to make the evidence fit your prejudice." I'm not a racist, Jennifer. I've worked with black officers. I've had black friends." "Then why did you assume that car was stolen? Why did you escalate when he was cooperating? Why did you put him in handcuffs in front of his children when every piece of documentation checked out?" Brian had no answer. Or rather, he had an answer, but it was one he couldn't face. Because facing it would mean confronting something dark and ugly inside himself, something he'd been nurturing for years without even realizing it. "The union rep called," he said instead, changing the subject. "They're going to defend me. Full legal support. They said this is a political witch hunt, that Bennett is using this to push his anti-police agenda." Jennifer's expression hardened. "Is that what you think this is? A witch hunt?" "Isn't it? He's a politician. Politicians always need a scapegoat. He's a father who was terrorized by a cop while his kids watched. Stop making yourself the victim here." "I am a victim." Brian stood up, his voice rising. "My life is over. I'm suspended without pay. I'm getting death threats. People are protesting outside my building. The media is calling me the face of police brutality, all because I made one mistake." "One mistake that you still won't take responsibility for," Jennifer said quietly. "That's the problem, Brian. You're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry you got caught." The words hit like a physical blow. Brian sank back onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. "What am I supposed to do?" "You could start by being honest, with yourself, if no one else." Jennifer moved toward the door. "The department's opening an internal investigation. You'll be called to give a statement. My advice: tell the truth. Actually examine your actions and your motivations. Because the Brian Reynolds I used to know, the one who became a cop to help people, he wouldn't recognize what you've become." She left him sitting there in the dim apartment, alone with his anger and his fear, and the terrible possibility that maybe, just maybe, everyone was right about him. Meanwhile, at the governor's mansion, Marcus was hosting an emergency meeting with civil rights leaders and community organizers. The formal dining room had been converted into a war room with laptops, legal pads, and passionate voices filling the space. "The legislation is strong," said Reverend James Crawford, a veteran of the civil rights movement who'd marched with John Lewis. "But strong legislation means nothing if we can't get it passed. The police unions will lobby hard against this." "Then we lobby harder," Marcus replied. "We need grassroots support, town halls in every district, personal testimonies from people who've experienced what I experienced." A young activist named Keisha Washington spoke up. "Governor, with respect, you experienced a fraction of what happens in our communities every day. You were handcuffed and released. Philando Castile was shot. Breonna Taylor was killed in her own home. Elijah McClain was murdered walking home from buying iced tea. Your story went viral because you're the governor, but there are hundreds of stories that never make the news. The room quieted. Marcus met Keisha's eyes, seeing the challenge there, but also the hope. She was testing him, seeing if he'd use his privilege to genuinely fight or just make symbolic gestures. You're absolutely right, Marcus said. Which is why this legislation doesn't just address traffic stops. It addresses use of force protocols, no-knock warrants, chokeholds, everything. And I want community voices at the table for every part of this process, not as tokens, as partners. Keisha studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, we're in. But Governor, you need to understand people are angry. They've been angry for decades. This video was just the match on kindling that's been drying for years. There are protests planned for tomorrow. Big ones. Peaceful protests are protected speech, Marcus said. I support them. What if they're not peaceful? Reverend Crawford asked quietly. What if people are tired of being peaceful while being brutalized? Marcus thought of Jordan's face in the car, the way innocence had drained away to be replaced by rage. How many young black men had experienced that same transformation? How many had decided that the system would never work for them, so why work within it? Then we give them a reason to believe the system can change, Marcus said. We pass this legislation. We hold Reynolds accountable. We prove that justice is possible. That night, Marcus sat with Jordan and Maya in their playroom, something he hadn't done in months. Maya was drawing. He noticed her pictures had gotten darker, angrier. Jordan was on his laptop reading articles about the incident. Dad, Jordan said without looking up. Mr. Peterson's son says his dad thinks you're making a big deal out of nothing. That you should have just shown your ID and it would have been fine. Marcus felt Tanya's warning glance but pressed on anyway. What do you think? Jordan finally looked at him. I think if you have to be the governor to be treated like a person, then something's really wrong. That's exactly right, son. But it's always going to be like this, isn't it? There was a hollowness in Jordan's voice that broke Marcus's heart. No matter what you do, people are always going to see us differently. Teachers, cops, store owners. They're always going to assume the worst. Marcus wanted to lie to say it would all be better, that the world was changing. But he'd promised himself after the incident that he'd never lie to his children about race again. Some people will, he admitted. But not all people. And the work we do now, the laws we change, the systems we reform, that's for your generation. So maybe you won't have to have this conversation with your own kids someday. Maya put down her crayons. Is that man going to jail? The one who hurt you? I don't know yet, baby girl. There's an investigation. He should go to jail, Maya said with startling fierceness. He was mean. He scared us. He'll face consequences, Marcus promised. I'll make sure of it. What Marcus didn't know was that at that exact moment, Brian Reynolds was sitting in his apartment cleaning his service weapon and seriously considering consequences of an entirely different kind. The hate mail. The death threats. The knowledge that his career was over, his reputation, destroyed, his future, obliterated. He thought about Jennifer's words, about taking responsibility, about examining his own prejudices. But that would require admitting things about himself he'd spent years denying. Easier to be angry. Easier to be the victim. Easier to blame everyone else. The liberal media, political correctness, the governor himself, for not just cooperating. Reynolds pulled up the police union's statement on his phone, reading it for the 100th time. Officer Reynolds followed proper protocol in a situation where he felt threatened. Governor Bennett's refusal to immediately identify himself created unnecessary escalation. This incident is being politically weaponized to attack law enforcement. Yes, that's what happened. That's the story he'd tell himself, the truth he'd cling to, because the alternative, that he'd brutalized an innocent man because of racist assumptions, was too painful to face. He set down the gun and picked up his phone, dialing the union lawyer. "I want to fight this," Reynolds said when the lawyer answered. "No settlements, no quiet retirement. I want a full investigation that clears my name." "Brian, are you sure the video is pretty damaging? We might be able to negotiate." "I didn't do anything wrong," Reynolds insisted, his voice hardening with conviction he didn't quite feel. "And I'm not going to let them destroy my career over political correctness." "All right," the lawyer sighed. "We'll fight. But you need to prepare yourself. This is going to get ugly." It already was ugly, and it was about to get much, much worse. By Monday morning, protests had erupted outside the state capitol. Thousands of people carrying signs that read, "Justice for All," and "End Police Brutality," and "We are all Marcus Bennett." News helicopters circled overhead. Police in riot gear lined the streets, creating a surreal irony that wasn't lost on anyone. Marcus watched from his office window, Patricia standing beside him. "The Speaker of the House called," she said. "He's willing to fast-track committee hearings on your legislation. He knows the political winds are blowing in our favor right now." "What's the catch?" "He wants concessions. Thinks the qualified immunity provision goes too far. Wants to water it down." Marcus turned from the window. "No, that's the whole point. Officers who violate civil rights need to face consequences. Real consequences. He has the votes to kill the bill entirely if we don't compromise. Then we go to the people. We make this a referendum on whether Georgia wants real change or just cosmetic reforms." Patricia pulled out her phone. "I'll start setting up town halls. But Marcus, you need to be prepared. Reynolds isn't backing down. The union's going to paint you as anti-cop. They'll bring out officers who feel demoralized, departments that feel under attack." "Good cops have nothing to fear from accountability," Marcus said. "It's the bad ones who are scared, and they should be." What neither of them knew was that Brian Reynolds had just been contacted by a conservative media outlet offering him $50,000 for an exclusive interview, one where he could tell his side of the story to millions of viewers who were already predisposed to see him as the victim of political correctness gone mad. Reynolds stared at the email, his finger hovering over the reply button. This could be his redemption, his chance to control the narrative, his opportunity to stop being the villain and become the hero, the brave cop standing up against a system that had abandoned law enforcement in favor of appeasing criminals and activists. He clicked accept. The interview would air Wednesday night, and it would change everything. At the governor's mansion, Marcus received the news of Reynolds' upcoming interview with grim resignation. He'd known this was coming. The playbook was always the same: deny, deflect, attack. "Let him talk," Marcus told his communications team. "Every word out of his mouth is another nail in his coffin." But Tanya, ever the pragmatist, wasn't so sure. "Marcus, he's going to humanize himself. Talk about his years of service, his family, how hard the job is. People want to believe cops are heroes. He's going to give them permission to dismiss what happened to you. Then we remind them what actually happened. We keep the focus on the evidence, the video, the truth." "Truth doesn't always matter," Tanya said softly. "You know that." She was right. He did know that. He'd seen it his entire career, how truth could be twisted, manipulated, packaged into whatever narrative served the powerful. But he'd also seen truth prevail when enough people demanded it, when enough voices refused to be silenced. That night, Marcus drafted a letter to be published in every major newspaper in Georgia. It wasn't about Reynolds. It wasn't about his own experience. It was about every parent who'd ever had to give their child the talk about how to interact with police, how to stay safe, how to survive an encounter that should never be dangerous in the first place. He wrote about the weight of telling your son to keep his hands visible, to never make sudden movements, to swallow his pride and his anger, because the alternative might be death. He wrote about the fear every black parent carried, the knowledge that no matter how successful you were, how educated, how powerful your children were, still vulnerable to someone else's prejudice. He wrote until his vision blurred and his hands cramped, pouring years of frustration and fear and hope onto the page. And when he finished, he knew it would change minds. Maybe not all minds, maybe not even most minds, but some. And in the fight for justice, some was where you started. The letter would publish Tuesday morning, the same day the state legislature would hold its first hearing on the Public Safety and Accountability Act. Wednesday, Reynolds would give his interview, and after that, the real battle would begin. But Marcus was ready. His children were watching. His state was watching. History was watching. And he'd be damned if he let this moment pass without fighting for something that mattered. Outside his window, the protest continued into the night, thousands of voices chanting for change. Marcus listened to them, drew strength from them, and prepared for the war ahead. Because this was bigger than one traffic stop, one cop, one governor. This was about the soul of America, and whether it was finally ready to confront the truth it had been avoiding for centuries. Tuesday morning broke over Atlanta with an unseasonable chill, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Marcus's letter appeared on the front page of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, the New York Times, and the Washington Post simultaneously. By 8 a.m., it had been read by over 10 million people. Tanya found him in the kitchen, still in his workout clothes, staring at his phone as the responses flooded in. Some were supportive, deeply moving testimonials from other parents who'd had the same terrifying conversations with their children. Others were venomous, accusing him of race-baiting, of exploiting his position, of being divisive. "You're not reading the comments, are you?" Tanya asked, already knowing the answer. "Someone has to," Marcus said quietly. "I need to understand what we're up against." What you're up against is the same thing every reformer faces: people who benefit from the status quo, and people too scared to imagine something different. She took the phone from his hands. "Save your energy for the hearing. That's in 3 hours." The state capitol building was surrounded by protesters and counter-protesters by the time Marcus arrived. On one side, thousands chanted for reform, holding signs with his face, with George Floyd's face, with Breonna Taylor's name. On the other, police officers and their supporters held thin blue line flags chanting, "Back the Blue," and carrying signs that read, "Support our heroes, not criminals." Captain Diane Harris met Marcus at a side entrance, her face drawn with exhaustion. "Governor, I need to brief you before you go in there," she said, falling into step beside him. "The unions brought in officers from across the state. They're packing the hearing room. This is going to be contentious." "I expected nothing less," Marcus replied. "How's the investigation into Reynolds proceeding?" Harris's expression tightened. "Complicated. He's claiming he had reasonable suspicion based on recent carjacking reports in the area. We've been through the records. There were no carjacking reports matching your vehicle description. But his lawyer's arguing that he had general awareness of crime trends which gave him latitude for the stop. That's absurd. He pulled me over because I'm black, and we all know it. I know it, you know it. But proving it in a disciplinary hearing is different from proving it in the court of public opinion." Harris paused outside the hearing room doors. "Sir, there's something else. Reynolds has been making statements to other officers saying this is all political revenge, that you're trying to destroy the department. Some of the rank and file are starting to believe him." Marcus absorbed this information, feeling the weight of it settle on his shoulders. "Then we show them the truth, with evidence, with policy, with change that actually makes their jobs safer and more effective." The hearing room was indeed packed. Marcus took his seat at the witness table, facing a panel of legislators who looked as divided as the crowd behind him. Senator James Murphy, a longtime conservative who'd built his career on law and order rhetoric, glared at Marcus with barely concealed hostility. Representative Sarah Chen, a progressive firebrand from Atlanta, gave him an encouraging nod. Senator Murphy gavelled the hearing to order. "We're here to discuss Governor Bennett's proposed Public Safety and Accountability Act. Governor, you have the floor." Marcus stood his prepared remarks in front of him, but he pushed them aside. This moment required something more than scripted talking points. Last Saturday morning, he began, his voice steady and clear. I was driving my children to their school science fair. My 12-year-old twins had worked for months on a solar panel project. They were excited, nervous, talking a mile a minute in the back seat. It was supposed to be a normal family morning. Instead, it became a nightmare that 42 million people have now witnessed. The room was absolutely silent. Even the protesters outside seemed to have quieted. I was pulled over without cause. I was searched without probable cause. I was handcuffed in front of my children without justification. And I know beyond any doubt that this happened because Officer Brian Reynolds saw a black man in an expensive car and made assumptions based on nothing but the color of my skin. Now, some of you might be thinking, but Governor, you're a public figure. You should have identified yourself immediately. And to that, I say why. Why should I have to prove I'm the governor to be treated with basic human dignity? Why should anyone have to prove their worth to avoid being brutalized by the very people sworn to protect them? Senator Murphy interrupted, his voice sharp. Governor, with all due respect, you're painting an entire profession with a very broad brush. Most officers are good people doing an incredibly difficult job. I agree completely, Marcus said, surprising him. Most officers are good people, which is exactly why they should support this legislation. Good officers have nothing to fear from accountability. They should want body cameras to protect them from false accusations. They should want better training to help them de-escalate situations safely. They should want to weed out the bad actors who make their jobs harder and more dangerous. Representative Chen leaned forward. Governor, can you walk us through the specific provisions of the Act? Marcus nodded, clicking to his first slide. The Act has 5 main components. First, mandatory body cameras for all officers with footage automatically uploaded to a secure server that cannot be tampered with. Second, independent civilian review boards in every jurisdiction with actual investigative and disciplinary authority. Third, explicit bans on racial profiling built into department policies with real consequences for violations. Fourth, comprehensive de-escalation and implicit bias training. And fifth, he paused, knowing this was where the real fight would begin. Qualified immunity reform that allows citizens to sue officers who violate their constitutional rights. The room erupted. Police officers in the gallery stood shouting. Supporters cheered. Senator Murphy banged his gavel repeatedly. Order. We will have order. A police officer Marcus didn't recognize stood up in the gallery. Governor, you're putting a target on our backs. Do you know how many split-second decisions we have to make? One mistake, and we lose our homes, our savings, everything. Marcus met his eyes. I respect that concern, officer. I truly do. But here's my question. What about the split-second decisions that cost innocent people their lives? What about Philando Castile, who followed every instruction and was still shot? What about Breonna Taylor, asleep in her own home? What about Elijah McClain walking home from the store? Where's the accountability for those mistakes? Those are tragic incidents, Senator Murphy said, but they're also rare. You're proposing to overhaul an entire system based on isolated incidents. Isolated. Marcus's voice rose for the first time. Senator, there have been over 1,000 police shootings in this country every year for the past decade. Black Americans are 3 times more likely to be killed by police than white Americans. These aren't isolated incidents. They're a pattern. And that pattern tells us the system is broken. Another officer stood, this one with tears in his eyes. Governor, I've been on the force for 23 years. I've never shot anyone. I've never brutalized anyone. I go to work every day trying to help my community, and now I'm being told I'm part of the problem. Marcus's expression softened. No, sir. You're not the problem. But if you stay silent while your brothers and sisters abuse their authority, if you protect the bad officers, instead of reporting them, if you put loyalty to the badge above justice, then yes, you become part of the problem. and I'm asking you to be part of the solution instead." The hearing continued for 3 more hours, with testimony from civil rights advocates, police chiefs, victims of police violence, and officers defending current practices. By the time it ended, no minds had been changed, but battle lines had been clearly drawn. Marcus left the Capitol building through a back exit, exhausted but resolute. Patricia was waiting in the car with updates. "The polling's mixed," she said. 53% of Georgians support the act, 42% oppose it, 5% undecided. But that support is soft people like the idea of reform, until they're told it might make them less safe. "Then we need to make the case that real accountability makes everyone safer," Marcus said. "What else?" "Reynolds' interview airs tomorrow night. The network sent us a preview clip. Marcus, you need to see this." She handed him her tablet. On the screen, Brian Reynolds sat across from a sympathetic interviewer, his face a picture of wounded dignity. "I served this city for 18 years, Reynolds said, his voice cracking with emotion. "I've run into burning buildings. I've talked down suicidal people. I've held dying children in my arms. And now my career is over because I made one split-second judgment call that the governor disagrees with." "Do you think race played a role in your decision to stop Governor Bennett?" the interviewer asked. "Absolutely not. I saw an expensive vehicle in a high-crime area. I had recent briefings about carjackings. I made a professional assessment that the vehicle needed to be checked. The fact that Governor Bennett happened to be driving it is irrelevant. But there were no carjackings matching that description." Reynolds shifted uncomfortably. "Intelligence isn't always that specific. We get general patterns, trends. And I was acting on that information in good faith." Marcus paused. The video discussed churning in his stomach. "He's lying." Harris confirmed there were no relevant reports. "I know," Patricia said, "but he's lying convincingly. And to people who want to believe him, who need to believe that the system isn't fundamentally broken, this gives them an out." That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He wandered the mansion's halls, eventually finding himself in Jordan's room. His son was awake, scrolling through his phone. "Can't sleep either?" Marcus asked from the doorway. Jordan shrugged. "Kids at school are talking. Some of them think you're overreacting. They say Officer Reynolds was just doing his job." Marcus sat on the edge of Jordan's bed. "What do you think?" "I think I was there. I saw his face. I heard what he said." Jordan's voice hardened. "I think people who weren't there don't get to tell us what happened." "You're right. They don't." Marcus took a breath. "Son, I need to tell you something. This fight we're in, it's going to get harder before it gets better. People are going to say cruel things about our family. Some of your friends might distance themselves. It's going to be painful." "I know, Dad. I'm not scared." "You should be a little scared. Being brave doesn't mean not being afraid. It means being afraid and doing the right thing anyway." Jordan looked at his father with eyes that seemed far too old for 12. "Are you scared?" Marcus considered lying, but he'd promised himself honesty. "Terrified. Every day. But I'm more afraid of what happens if we don't fight. More afraid of you having to live in a world where this keeps happening." "Then we fight," Jordan said simply. "Together." Wednesday evening arrived with ominous speed. The entire state seemed to pause at 8 p.m. when Reynolds' interview began broadcasting. Marcus watched it with his senior staff Tanya beside him, her hand gripping his tightly. Reynolds had clearly been media trained. Gone was the aggressive, hostile officer from the video. In his place sat a tired, earnest man who spoke about his dedication to public service, his fears for officer safety, his heartbreak at being portrayed as a racist. "I have black friends," Reynolds said at one point. "I've worked with black officers. Some of my best partners over the years have been African American. The idea that I would target someone because of their race is deeply offensive to me. Yet the video shows you treating Governor Bennett quite aggressively," the interviewer pressed gently. "Context is everything," Reynolds replied. "The governor wasn't complying with my instructions. He was argumentative. And yes, when someone isn't following commands during a traffic stop, we have to escalate our response for everyone's safety." Tanya made a sound of disgust. He's rewriting history in real time. But the most damaging moment came near the end when Reynolds looked directly into the camera with glistening eyes. "I just want to say to Governor Bennett, I'm sorry your children were scared. That was never my intention. But I'm also sorry that you're using this incident to push a political agenda that will make it harder for officers like me to protect the communities we serve. I hope you can find it in your heart to consider the unintended consequences of your actions." Marcus turned off the television, his hands shaking with rage. He just apologized for my children being scared while simultaneously blaming me for his actions. "And it's going to work," Patricia said grimly, checking her phone. "Social media's already shifting. #StandWithReynolds is trending. People are calling you opportunistic, saying you're exploiting this for political gain." "Let them call me whatever they want," Marcus said, standing abruptly. "I'm holding a press conference tomorrow morning, live from the Capitol steps. No more playing defense." The press conference was scheduled for 9 a.m., but reporters started gathering at 7. By the time Marcus took the podium, every major network was broadcasting live. The crowd stretched across the Capitol grounds, a sea of faces waiting to see if their governor would back down or double down. Marcus stepped to the microphone, the morning sun bright in his eyes. Behind him stood civil rights leaders, victims of police violence, and 3 police officers who supported reform. He'd specifically chosen those officers knowing their presence would undermine Reynolds' narrative that he was anti-police. "Thank you all for coming," Marcus began. "Last night, Officer Brian Reynolds gave an interview in which he apologized for my children being frightened, but took no responsibility for frightening them. He expressed regret that I was upset, but not that he violated my rights. He painted himself as a victim of political correctness while ignoring the actual victim, an innocent citizen brutalized for the crime of driving while black." He paused, letting the words settle. "But I'm not here to talk about Officer Reynolds. I'm here to talk about the thousands of Brian Reynolds out there, the officers who see skin color before they see humanity, who assume guilt before confirming evidence, who escalate when they should de-escalate. I'm here to talk about a system that protects those officers instead of protecting the citizens they're sworn to serve." A reporter shouted from the crowd. "Governor, the Fraternal Order of Police says your act will make officers hesitant to do their jobs, potentially putting lives at risk." "Good officers won't hesitate," Marcus shot back. "Only officers who want to abuse their authority without consequence should be hesitant. And frankly, I'm fine with them being hesitant. I'm fine with them thinking twice before putting their hands on innocent people." Another reporter. "But what about officer safety? Don't they have a right to protect themselves?" "Of course they do, which is why this act includes better training, better equipment, and better mental health support. We're not asking officers to be heroes without support. We're asking them to be professionals with accountability." A conservative reporter Marcus recognized from Fox News stood. "Governor, aren't you being hypocritical? You enjoy the protection of armed security, but you want to handcuff the very people who protect ordinary citizens." Marcus had been waiting for this question. "I don't have armed security because I'm afraid of ordinary citizens. I have security because I'm a high-profile target. And you know what? My security detail is held to incredibly high standards. They're vetted, trained, monitored, and accountable. If one of them violated someone's rights, they'd be immediately removed and prosecuted. I'm simply asking that we hold all law enforcement to those same standards." The questions continued for 40 minutes, with Marcus fielding each one directly and forcefully. By the time he finished, the narrative had shifted again. Social media exploded with support. #Public Safety Act started trending. The soft polling numbers began to harden. But that afternoon, Marcus received a call that changed everything. "Governor, it's Captain Harris. We have a situation. Officer Reynolds has been making threats." Marcus's blood ran cold. "What kind of threats?" "Against you, sir." Another officer reported that Reynolds was drinking heavily last night after the interview, saying he'd been made a scapegoat, that you'd destroyed his life. He said, and I quote, Bennett needs to understand there are consequences for ruining a man's career. Is that a direct threat? It's ambiguous enough that we can't arrest him, but clear enough that we're taking it seriously. Sir, I'm recommending you increase your security detail immediately. Marcus thought of Tanya, of Jordan, and Maya. Do it. But Captain, I'm not hiding. I'm not going to let Reynolds intimidate me into backing down. I understand, sir, but please be careful. Desperate men do desperate things. That warning would prove prophetic sooner than anyone expected. The following Monday, as the legislature prepared to vote on the Public Safety and Accountability Act, Marcus worked late at the Capitol reviewing last-minute amendments with his legal team. It was nearly midnight when the meeting finally ended. His security detail had stepped out to bring the car around, leaving Marcus alone in the parking garage for just a few moments. Those moments were all Brian Reynolds needed. Marcus heard the footsteps behind him, fast and aggressive. He turned just as Reynolds emerged from between two cars, his face twisted with rage and desperation. The smell of alcohol was overwhelming. "You destroyed my life," Reynolds slurred, pulling something from his jacket. Not a gun, a knife, its blade catching the fluorescent lights. "You took everything from me." Marcus raised his hands slowly, his legal training kicking in, even as fear flooded his system. "Brian, you don't want to do this. Put the knife down. Don't tell me what I want." Reynolds lurched forward, the blade slashing through the air. "You self-righteous son of a bitch, sitting in your mansion making your laws while my career burns. You don't know what it's like to lose everything. I know exactly what it's like to be threatened by someone who's supposed to protect me," Marcus said, backing away carefully. "I know what it's like to fear for my life while my children watch. You created this situation, Brian, not me." "I was doing my job," Reynolds shouted, and this time he lunged forward. The knife came within inches of Marcus's chest before Marcus twisted away years of college basketball, giving him just enough agility to dodge. "Your job is not to brutalize innocent people," Marcus shouted back, adrenaline overriding his fear. "Your job is not to assume guilt based on skin color." Reynolds's face crumpled, tears streaming down his cheeks even as he held the knife. "I'm not a racist. I'm not. I'm just a cop trying to do my job in a world that hates us." "Then be better," Marcus said. "Put down the knife and be better." The parking garage door burst open. Marcus's security detail rushed in, weapons drawn, shouting for Reynolds to drop the knife. For a terrible moment, Marcus thought Reynolds might force them to shoot him, might end this tragedy with more violence. But Reynolds's hand opened. The knife clattered to the concrete. He dropped to his knees, sobbing. "I'm sorry," he kept saying. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry." But Marcus noticed the security cameras positioned throughout the garage, their red lights blinking steadily. Every moment had been recorded, every word captured. And this time there would be no ambiguity, no alternative narrative, no way for Reynolds to play the victim. As the police led Reynolds away in handcuffs, the bitter irony wasn't lost on anyone. Marcus leaned against a concrete pillar, his legs suddenly weak. His head of security, Marcus Williams, approached cautiously. "Governor, are you all right? Do you need medical attention?" Marcus shook his head, though his hands were trembling. "I'm fine. I need to call my wife." The call was one of the hardest he'd ever made. Hearing Tanya's terror, her relief, her anger, it broke something inside him that professional composure had been holding together. By the time he got home, Jordan and Maya were awake, having heard the news. They clung to him, and he clung back, all of them crying in the mansion's entrance hall. "He tried to hurt you," Maya sobbed. "He tried to hurt you again." "But he didn't," Marcus said, stroking her hair. "I'm okay. We're all okay." But they weren't okay. None of them were. And as the footage of Reynolds's attack began circulating, because of course it circulated, everything circulated. Now Marcus wondered what kind of victory this was, built on trauma and fear and violence barely avoided. The only consolation was that the attack had done what no amount of testimony or legislation could do. It had revealed Brian Reynolds' true character to anyone still doubting. It had shown the rage, the entitlement, the refusal to accept responsibility that had driven every moment of their original encounter. And perhaps, most importantly, it had galvanized support for the Public Safety and Accountability Act in a way nothing else could have. Because if an officer was willing to attack the governor of Georgia, what would he be willing to do to citizens with no power, no platform, no protection? The vote was now inevitable. The question was whether justice would follow. The arraignment happened 72 hours after the attack. Brian Reynolds stood before Judge Catherine Morrison, his hands cuffed in front of him, his expensive lawyer beside him looking grim. The charges were serious. Aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, terroristic threats against a public official. Combined, they carried a potential sentence of 25 years. Marcus sat in the gallery with Tanya flanked by security that now felt less like protection and more like a cage. He watched Reynolds shuffle into the courtroom, saw the man flinch when their eyes met. There was no defiance left in him now, no righteous indignation. Just a hollow-eyed shell of a man who'd lost everything and still couldn't understand why. The prosecutor district attorney Helen Chen stood to address the court. Your Honor, the defendant Brian Reynolds attacked Governor Marcus Bennett with a deadly weapon in a premeditated assault. This was not a moment of passion. Surveillance footage shows Mr. Reynolds waiting in that parking garage for 47 minutes drinking from a flask, clearly planning his attack. He is a danger to society and to the governor specifically. The state requests remand without bail. Reynolds' attorney, Martin Schwartz, a silver-haired veteran of high-profile cases, rose immediately. Your Honor, my client is a decorated police officer with 18 years of unblemished service to this community. He has no criminal record. He has deep roots here. He's not a flight risk. What happened in that parking garage was a mental health crisis, not premeditated violence. Mr. Reynolds has been under enormous public pressure, receiving death threats, losing his livelihood. He snapped. It was wrong, but it was the act of a desperate man having a breakdown, not a calculating criminal. Judge Morrison, a black woman in her 60s who'd built her reputation on fairness and no-nonsense jurisprudence, peered over her glasses at Schwartz. Counselor, are you seriously arguing that we should have sympathy for a man who terrorized the governor with a knife because he was upset about facing consequences for his own actions? I'm arguing that mental health should be considered when setting bail, Your Honor. Mental health. Morrison's voice dripped with skepticism. Mr. Reynolds, do you have anything you'd like to say? Reynolds looked up, his voice barely a whisper. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Sorry for what specifically? The judge pressed. Sorry for the initial traffic stop. Sorry for handcuffing an innocent man. Sorry for traumatizing his children. Or just sorry you got caught? Reynolds' lawyer started to object, but the judge cut him off. I'll answer my own question. Based on your client's interview last week, where he showed zero remorse for his initial actions, I'm inclined to believe he's only sorry about the consequences, not the conduct. Bail is denied. Trial date set for 8 weeks from today. The gavel struck and Reynolds' shoulders slumped. As the bailiff led him away, he turned one last time to look at Marcus, and in that moment Marcus saw something unexpected, not anger, but a desperate plea for understanding, for forgiveness, for someone to tell him he wasn't the monster everyone said he was. Marcus looked away first. Outside the courthouse, reporters mobbed them. Marcus had prepared a statement, but Tanya spoke first, her voice fierce and unwavering. My husband could have died Monday night. My children could have lost their father. Not because he did anything wrong, but because Officer Reynolds couldn't accept responsibility for his own actions. This is what happens when we don't hold people accountable. This is what happens when we protect bad officers instead of protecting the community. This has to stop. A reporter called out, Mrs. Bennett, do you want to see Reynolds get the maximum sentence? Tanya paused, glancing at Marcus. It was a question they'd been wrestling with privately for days. Marcus stepped forward to answer. What I want, he said carefully, is for this to mean something. Officer Reynolds needs to face justice. But justice isn't just about punishment. It's about rehabilitation. It's about ensuring this never happens again. If all we do is lock him up and throw away the key, we haven't actually solved anything. So you're saying you want leniency, another reporter pressed. I'm saying I want transformation, both for Reynolds and for the system that created him. The statement confused some people and outraged others. Conservative media accused Marcus of being soft on crime. Progressive activists worried he was backing down. But Marcus wasn't concerned with satisfying either extreme. He was thinking about Jordan and Maya, about the kind of world he wanted them to inherit, about whether the cycle of violence and vengeance could ever be broken if someone didn't have the courage to try something different. That night, he found Jordan in his room, no longer drawing pictures of solar panels and science projects, but sketching something else entirely. Marcus looked over his son's shoulder and saw detailed illustrations of people protesting, of raised fists, of the words, "Justice now," in bold letters. "That's powerful work, son," Marcus said quietly. Jordan didn't look up. "I want to do something, Dad. Not just watch. Not just talk about it. Actually do something." "Like what?" "I don't know yet. But there are kids my age all over the country who've seen what I saw, who've experienced what we experienced. We should be organizing, learning our rights, teaching each other how to stay safe. Adults talk about change, but we're the ones who have to live in the world you're creating." Marcus sat on the edge of Jordan's bed, pride and heartbreak warring in his chest. "You're 12 years old. You should be worried about video games and basketball, not police reform." "But I'm not," Jordan said simply. "I can't be. Not anymore." The Public Safety and Accountability Act came to a vote the following week. The state Senate chamber was packed beyond capacity, with overflow crowds watching on screens in the hallway. Marcus sat in the gallery, knowing he couldn't vote on his own legislation, but needing to witness this moment. Senator Murphy rose to speak against the bill, his voice grave. "Colleagues, I understand the emotions driving this legislation. We all saw the video. We all condemned Officer Reynolds' attack on the governor. But we cannot legislate from a place of trauma. This act goes too far. It will handcuff our police officers, make them second-guess every decision, and ultimately make our communities less safe." Representative Chen stood to rebut. "With respect to my colleague, I've heard this argument before. We heard it when we tried to ban lynching. We heard it when we tried to integrate schools. We heard it when we tried to end stop and frisk. Every time we try to protect civil rights, someone argues it will make us less safe. But study after study shows that communities with police accountability have lower crime rates, better police-community relations, and safer streets for everyone. This isn't about handcuffing police. This is about handcuffing police brutality." The debate raged for 3 hours. Officers testified about the dangers they faced. Families testified about loved ones killed by police. Legal scholars debated constitutional implications. Marcus sat through all of it, his face impassive, but his hands gripping Tanya's tightly. Finally, the vote was called. The chamber fell silent as names were read and votes recorded. Marcus found himself holding his breath, though he'd already counted the votes a dozen times, already knew the outcome. "The motion passes 32 to 24, the speaker announced. "The Public Safety and Accountability Act is hereby adopted." The gallery erupted in cheers and protests simultaneously. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling tears slip down his cheeks for the first time since the parking garage attack. Tanya wrapped her arms around him. "You did it," she whispered. "Baby, you actually did it." But Marcus knew the real work was just beginning. Passing legislation was one thing. Implementing it, defending it against legal challenges, changing hearts and minds that would take years. The trial of Brian Reynolds began on a cold morning in late October. Marcus had been subpoenaed to testify, and he'd spent weeks preparing with the prosecution team. But nothing could really prepare him for sitting across from Reynolds in a courtroom for recounting every detail of both the traffic stop and the parking garage attack, while Reynolds stared at the table, unable or unwilling to meet his eyes. The defense's strategy quickly became clear. Diminished capacity due to mental health crisis, combined with character witnesses testifying to Reynolds's years of service. They paraded fellow officers to the stand, each describing Reynolds as a dedicated cop who'd cracked under unprecedented pressure. "Brian Reynolds saved my life." One officer testified, his voice thick with emotion. "We responded to a domestic violence call, and the suspect pulled a gun. Brian put himself between me and that gun. He took a bullet in the shoulder. That's the Brian Reynolds I know, not this broken man sitting here." The prosecutor cross-examined carefully. "Officer Davis, was Mr. Reynolds ever disciplined for excessive force?" "No, ma'am." "Were there ever complaints filed against him?" A pause. "There may have been some complaints over the years." "How many?" "I'm not sure of the exact number." "Would it surprise you to know there were 17 complaints filed against Mr. Reynolds, including 4 allegations of racial profiling, all of which were dismissed by Internal Affairs?" The officer shifted uncomfortably. "That doesn't mean they were legitimate complaints." "It doesn't mean they weren't either, does it?" When Marcus took the stand, the courtroom was silent enough to hear breathing. The prosecutor, Helen Chen, approached him gently. "Governor Bennett, can you describe what happened on the morning of September 14th? Marcus took a breath and began. He described the science fair, the laughter in the car, the sudden flash of lights. He described the fear in his children's eyes, the cold metal of handcuffs, the humiliation of being treated like a criminal in front of his family. He described every word Reynolds had said, every assumption he'd made, every moment of that encounter. "And when you were in handcuffs, Governor, did you tell Officer Reynolds who you were?" "Yes, I told him I was Marcus Bennett, the governor of Georgia." "And how did he respond?" "He laughed. He said, 'Sure you are, and I'm the president.'" "Did you feel threatened during this encounter?" "Absolutely. I'm a black man who's very aware of how these situations can end. I was thinking about Philando Castile, about Sandra Bland, about every traffic stop that's ended in tragedy. I was terrified not for myself, but for my children who were watching." Schwartz's cross-examination was aggressive. "Governor Bennett, isn't it true that you were argumentative with Officer Reynolds?" "I was calm and cooperative. I questioned why I was being detained, which is my constitutional right." "You refused to step out of the vehicle when first asked." "I asked for clarification on why that was necessary. That's not refusal." "You've built your entire political career on civil rights activism, haven't you?" "I've dedicated my life to justice, yes." "And this incident, being stopped by a white officer, provided perfect ammunition for your political agenda." Marcus felt anger flash through him, but kept his voice level. "Counselor, are you suggesting I engineered being brutalized in front of my children for political gain?" "I'm suggesting you've used this incident to push legislation that many believe goes too far. What goes too far is handcuffing innocent people. What goes too far is attacking someone with a knife because you can't accept responsibility for your actions. Your client crossed every line, Mr. Schwartz. I'm simply trying to make sure no one else has to experience what my family experienced." The trial lasted 3 weeks. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. When they returned with guilty verdicts on all counts, Reynolds collapsed in his chair, his lawyer catching him. Marcus watched it all from the gallery, feeling not triumph, but a deep, weary sadness. At the sentencing hearing 2 weeks later, the prosecutor requested the maximum 25 years. Reynolds's lawyer pleaded for leniency, presenting psychiatric evaluations, letters from family members, testimony about Reynolds's service record. Then, Judge Morrison asked if Marcus wanted to make a statement. Marcus had wrestled with what to say for weeks. Tanya had told him to follow his heart. Patricia had advised political calculation. Jordan had said simply, "Do what you think is right, Dad." Marcus stood and approached the bench. "Your Honor, I'm here today not as the governor of Georgia, but as a father. a father who had to explain to his 12-year-old children why a police officer assumed their dad was a criminal, a father who had to comfort his daughter through nightmares, a father who nearly died in a parking garage because a man couldn't accept that his prejudices had consequences. He paused, looking directly at Reynolds for the first time. Brian Reynolds deserves to be punished. He broke the law. He terrorized my family. He violated everything the badge is supposed to represent. But I've spent my career believing that justice is about more than vengeance. It's about transformation. It's about breaking cycles, not perpetuating them. The courtroom stirred with whispers. Marcus continued. Your Honor, I'm asking the court to include a comprehensive rehabilitation program as part of Mr. Reynolds' sentence. Therapy for his addiction, counseling for his clear racial biases, restorative justice programming where he has to truly confront what he did and why he did it. Because if Brian Reynolds serves 25 years and comes out the same man who went in, we've accomplished nothing. But if he can transform, if he can truly understand and change, then maybe, just maybe, his story can help change others. The courtroom erupted. Reporters scrambled for their phones. Reynolds, for the first time during the trial, looked at Marcus with something approaching wonder. Judge Morrison gavelled for order. Governor Bennett, you're asking for mercy for a man who showed you none. I'm asking for justice, Your Honor. Real justice. The kind that actually makes our community safer. Morrison studied Marcus for a long moment, then turned to Reynolds. Mr. Reynolds, you've heard the governor's statement. The man you brutalized twice is asking this court to give you an opportunity for redemption. Do you have anything to say? Reynolds stood, his legs shaking. I don't deserve his mercy. I don't deserve anyone's mercy. What I did was unforgivable. The traffic stop, the arrest, the attack, all of it. Governor Bennett, I can't undo what I've done to you and your family. But if the court gives me the chance, I will spend every day for the rest of my life trying to become someone who deserves the compassion you've shown me today. Judge Morrison was silent for a full minute, her face unreadable. Finally, she spoke. Brian Reynolds, I hereby sentence you to 15 years in state prison with the possibility of parole after 8 years contingent upon successful completion of comprehensive rehabilitation programming, including substance abuse treatment, psychological counseling with specific focus on implicit bias and racism, and participation in restorative justice programs. Additionally, you will be permanently barred from law enforcement work in any capacity. The gavel struck. Reynolds sagged with relief and despair simultaneously. As they led him away, he mouthed 2 words to Marcus. Thank you. Outside the courthouse, Marcus faced the inevitable press conference. The questions came rapid fire, some supportive, others accusatory. Governor Summer calling your statement weak, saying you went soft on a man who tried to kill you. Marcus met the camera directly. There's nothing soft about demanding someone confront their demons and change. Prison is easy, you just survive. Real transformation is hard. I'm asking Brian Reynolds to do the hard thing, and I'm asking our entire justice system to do the hard thing too. Stop just warehousing people and start actually rehabilitating them. Do you really believe people like Reynolds can change? I have to believe it. Because if we don't, then what's the point of any of this? We just keep cycling through the same violence, the same prejudice, the same tragedies forever. Someone has to break the cycle. It might as well be us. The months that followed were transformative in ways Marcus couldn't have anticipated. The Public Safety and Accountability Act rolled out across Georgia, not without resistance, but with increasing success. Body cameras caught instances of both police misconduct and false accusations, vindicating Marcus's vision. Civilian review boards uncovered patterns of abuse in several departments, leading to firings and prosecutions. De-escalation training reduced use of force incidents by 37% in the first year alone. But the most profound changes happened within Marcus's own family. Jordan, true to his word, founded a youth organization called Know Your Rights ATL. Working with civil rights attorneys, he created workshops teaching young people about constitutional protections during police encounters. Within 6 months, the program had chapters in 12 Georgia cities and was fielding requests from across the country. Marcus attended one of Jordan's workshops and watched his son, no longer quite a boy, not quite a man, stand before 60 teenagers and speak with authority and passion. "You have the right to remain silent," Jordan said. "You have the right to refuse a search without a warrant. You have the right to record police encounters. But most importantly, you have the right to come home safe. Everything I teach you today is about protecting that right." A young black girl in the front row raised her hand. "But what if they don't care about our rights? What if they do whatever they want anyway?" Jordan's face grew serious. "Then you survive the encounter and you report it afterward. You don't argue, you don't resist, you stay alive. Because we can fight injustice, but we can't fight it if we're dead. That's not fair, and it's not right, but it's real." Marcus felt his throat tighten, pride and sorrow mixing until he couldn't separate them. His son had learned lessons no 12-year-old should have to learn, carried burdens no child should have to carry. But he was turning that pain into purpose, and there was a terrible beauty in that. Maya's transformation was quieter, but no less powerful. She'd started writing poetry, processing her trauma through metaphor and verse. Her English teacher submitted one of her poems to a national youth poetry contest without telling her. It won first place and was published in an anthology. The poem was called "Watching Daddy," and it described the traffic stop through a child's eyes. The final stanza read, "They say my daddy is important, that he runs the state, makes laws, but laws didn't protect him that day. His suit didn't protect him. His office didn't protect him. The only thing that might have saved him was a different color skin. And I can't stop wondering what that means for me." The poem went viral. Maya was invited to recite it at the state capitol at the NAACP convention at a congressional hearing on police reform in Washington, D.C. Each time Marcus watched his daughter speak truth with a courage that humbled him. One evening, as Marcus tucked Maya into bed, something he'd made sure to do every night he was home, no matter how late she asked him a question. "Daddy, do you think Officer Reynolds has read my poem?" Marcus was taken aback. "I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe." "Why?" "Because I want him to know. I want him to know what he did to us, what he did to me. I was just a kid, excited about a science fair, and he turned that into the worst day of my life." "I know, baby. I'm so sorry." "Don't be sorry, Daddy. You didn't do anything wrong. He did, and I need him to understand that." She paused. "But I also need to understand something. Why did you ask the judge to help him, after everything he did?" Marcus considered how to answer, how to explain adult concepts of justice and mercy to a child who'd been robbed of innocence too soon. "Because hurt people," he said finally. "Officer Reynolds was hurt by his own prejudices, by a system that never challenged those prejudices, by a culture that told him it was okay to treat people differently based on skin color. He hurt us because he was hurting. And if we just punish him without healing him, he'll still be hurt when he gets out. Still dangerous, still capable of hurting others." "So, you're trying to heal him?" "I'm trying to give him the chance to heal himself. That's all any of us can do for each other." Maya thought about this, her young face serious. "I'm not ready to forgive him yet." "You don't have to be. Forgiveness isn't required for healing. Your healing, my healing, that's separate from whether he deserves forgiveness." "Then I'm going to focus on healing," Maya decided. "And maybe someday, if he really changes, I'll think about the rest." In a medium-security prison 200 miles away, Brian Reynolds was doing exactly what Marcus had asked, confronting himself. The rehabilitation program was brutal in its honesty, forcing him to examine every assumption, every prejudice, every moment of the traffic stop and parking garage attack. His therapist, Dr. Raymond Hayes, a black man with decades of experience in criminal psychology, showed him no mercy. "Tell me what you saw when you first spotted Governor Bennett's car," Dr. Hayes said during one session. "I saw an expensive vehicle. Before that, The very first thing you noticed. Reynolds hesitated. I saw a black man. And what did you think? I thought. Reynolds struggled decades of denial warring with the requirement to be honest. I thought he probably didn't belong in that car, that it was probably stolen. Why? Because Reynolds stopped the words catching in his throat. Because I assumed black men in expensive cars are criminals. And where did that assumption come from? I don't know. Yes, you do. Dig deeper. Reynolds closed his eyes and the memories came flooding back. His father a cop coming home with stories about those people in those neighborhoods. His training officer making casual racist jokes. The locker room culture that treated racial profiling as common sense instead of bigotry. Years and years of small moments, small comments, small assumptions that built into a worldview he'd never questioned. It came from everywhere, Reynolds whispered. It was just the way things were. And now I see it for what it is. Racism. I was racist. I am racist. And I hurt people because of it. Dr. Hayes nodded. That's the first step. Acknowledging it. Now comes the hard part, changing it. The change was slow and painful. Reynolds participated in racial bias workshops, read books by black authors, watched documentaries about police brutality. He wrote letters to Marcus never sent per the rules of the program, but therapeutic nonetheless. Apologizing, explaining, begging for understanding he knew he didn't deserve. But perhaps most transformative were the sessions where he listened to other inmates, mostly black and brown men, share their experiences with police. Story after story of being pulled over for driving while black, of being searched without cause, of being treated like criminals for existing. Reynolds had dismissed these stories his entire career as exaggerations, as criminals playing the race card. Now he understood they were true. All of them. And he'd been part of the system that created them. 1 year after his sentencing, Reynolds was allowed a single media interview as part of the rehabilitation program's accountability requirement. The interviewer was the same journalist who'd given him the sympathetic platform before. But this time, the conversation went very differently. Officer Reynolds, when we last spoke, you maintained you did nothing wrong. Do you still believe that? Reynolds met the camera directly. No. I was completely wrong. About everything. I racially profiled Governor Bennett. I escalated a situation that never should have escalated. I traumatized 2 children. I attacked a man with a knife. I blamed everyone but myself. And then I had the audacity to play the victim. He paused. I was the villain of that story. Not the hero, not the victim, the villain. What changed? I had to look at myself honestly for the first time in my life. And I didn't like what I saw. But Governor Bennett gave me a gift, the opportunity to become someone better. Someone who deserves to look at himself in the mirror. Do you have anything you want to say to the Bennett family? Reynolds's eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry. Those words aren't enough, but they're all I have. I'm sorry for the fear, the trauma, the pain I caused. I'm sorry that Maya Bennett can't look at police officers without being afraid. I'm sorry that Jordan Bennett had to learn at 12 years old that the world isn't fair or just. I'm sorry that Governor and Mrs. Bennett had to watch their children suffer because of my prejudice. His voice broke. And I'm spending every day trying to become someone who deserves their mercy. The interview aired on the 1-year anniversary of the original traffic stop. Marcus watched it with his family, all of them silent as Reynolds spoke. When it ended, Jordan turned to his father. Do you believe him? Marcus considered the question carefully. I believe he's trying. Whether he succeeds, whether he truly changes, that's on him. But I believe he's trying. Is that enough? It's a start. As the anniversary approached, Marcus prepared for the moment that would define his legacy. The Public Safety and Accountability Act had been so successful in Georgia that 6 other states were adopting similar legislation. National civil rights organizations were pushing for federal reforms based on the Georgia model. And Marcus had been approached about running for the U.S. Senate, about taking his fight for justice to a bigger stage. But before any of that, there was one more thing he needed to do. One more conversation that had been building toward this moment for 12 months. The stage was set for a public forum on police reform, and Marcus had made an unusual request. He wanted Brian Reynolds there participating via video link from prison. His staff had thought he was crazy. The optics were terrible, the political risk enormous. But Marcus wasn't interested in optics anymore. He was interested in truth. The auditorium at Georgia State University held 3,000 people, and every seat was filled. Camera crews lined the walls. Protesters on both sides gathered outside their chants, filtering through the thick walls like distant thunder. Marcus stood backstage adjusting his tie for the 3rd time, his hands steadier than his heart. Tanya appeared beside him, taking his hands in hers to still their movement. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly. "You've already won. The legislation passed. Reynolds is in prison. You could just declare victory and move on." "This was never about victory," Marcus replied. "It was about change, real lasting change. And that doesn't happen unless people see that transformation is possible. Even for him. Especially for him. If Brian Reynolds can change, anyone can." Jordan and Maya were in the front row. Marcus had insisted on that. Whatever happened today, he wanted his children to see it. They'd been part of this story from the beginning, witnesses to both the worst and the best of humanity. They deserved to see how it ended, or at least how this chapter ended. The moderator, Professor Angela Williams from Morehouse College, took the stage to enthusiastic applause. She was a renowned expert on criminal justice reform, someone Marcus trusted to navigate the complicated waters ahead. "Good evening," Professor Williams began. "Tonight we gather for a conversation that many said shouldn't happen. Some believe giving Officer Brian Reynolds a platform is wrong, that it normalizes his actions or provides him undeserved sympathy. Others believe Governor Bennett's willingness to engage in restorative justice represents the kind of radical compassion our country desperately needs. We're here tonight not to provide easy answers, but to grapple with hard questions about justice, accountability, and the possibility of redemption." She gestured to the large screen behind her, which flickered to life, showing Reynolds sitting in what appeared to be a classroom within the prison facility. He looked different than he had at the trial, older somehow, with gray threading through his hair and lines etched deep around his eyes. But there was also something else in his face. Something that hadn't been there before, a kind of settled sadness that came from genuine understanding rather than self-pity. "Officer Reynolds," Professor Williams began, "you're participating tonight voluntarily as part of your rehabilitation program. Can you tell us why you agreed to this?" Reynolds took a breath, his hands clasped on the table in front of him. "Because hiding from what I did doesn't help anyone. Not me, not the Bennett family, not the community I betrayed. Governor Bennett showed me mercy when I deserved none. The least I can do is be honest about what I did and why I did it." "Then let's start there. What did you do in your own words?" "I racially profiled Governor Bennett. I saw a black man in an expensive car and immediately assumed criminality. I pulled him over without legal cause. When he quite reasonably questioned why he was being detained, I escalated the situation instead of de-escalating it. I put him in handcuffs in front of his children to assert dominance, to remind him of my power and his vulnerability. And then, when I faced consequences for those actions, I refused to take responsibility. I blamed him, blamed political correctness, blamed everyone but myself. And when that wasn't enough, I tried to kill him." The audience stirred. Marcus, now seated on stage, kept his expression neutral, but his hands gripped the armrests of his chair. Professor Williams turned to Marcus. "Governor, you're hearing this now in real time. What's your response?" Marcus looked at the screen at Reynolds's face, searching for signs of performance or manipulation. But all he saw was a broken man trying to piece himself back together through honesty. "I appreciate the acknowledgement," Marcus said carefully. "But Brian, I need to ask you something. In your interview before the trial, you said you weren't racist, that you had black friends and colleagues. Now you're admitting to racial profiling. Help me understand. Were you lying then, or are you lying now?" Reynolds flinched at the directness of the question. "I was lying to myself then. I genuinely believed I wasn't racist, because I didn't use slurs, didn't join the Klan, didn't think of myself as a bad person. But racism isn't just about personal hatred. It's about systems and assumptions and biases so deeply ingrained you don't even see them. I didn't hate black people, Governor. I just didn't see them as fully human. I didn't see you as fully human that morning. And that's worse in some ways because it's so insidious." A voice called out from the audience, a young black woman standing with tears on her face. "How are we supposed to trust that you've changed? How many times have we heard these apologies after the fact? After the damage is done? After someone dies?" Reynolds looked directly at her through the camera. "You're not supposed to trust me. I haven't earned trust. I've earned suspicion and anger and fear. The question isn't whether you should trust me. The question is whether the system that created me, that enabled me, that protected me for 18 years, whether that system can change. And that's not on me to answer. That's on Governor Bennett and the legislation he fought for, and the thousands of people doing the real work of reform." Marcus felt something shift in the room, a collective intake of breath, as people realized this wasn't going to be a simple story of victim and villain forgiveness and redemption. It was going to be more complicated than that, more honest. "Let me ask you both something," Professor Williams said. "Governor Bennett, you pushed for rehabilitation as part of Reynolds's sentence. Brian, you're participating in an intensive program addressing racial bias, substance abuse, and restorative justice. A year in what has that actually looked like?" Reynolds spoke first. "It's looked like having every assumption I've ever held challenged. It's looked like sitting in circles with black men I would have arrested without thinking twice, listening to their stories, understanding that they're not that different from me, except for how the world treats them. It's looked like reading Ibram X. Kendi and Ta-Nehisi Coates, and Michelle Alexander, and understanding how deliberately the system was built to oppress. It's looked like realizing that I was a tool of that oppression, and the worst part is, I thought I was one of the good guys." He paused, his voice thickening. "My therapist asked me to write down every racist assumption I'd made in my career, every time I'd pulled someone over for fitting a description, every time I'd been harder on a black suspect than a white one. The list was 43 pages long. 43 pages of me destroying lives because of prejudice I didn't even acknowledge I had." Marcus watched the audience react, saw the anger and pain on black faces, saw the discomfort on white faces, saw young people recording on their phones, capturing this moment for whatever use they'd make of it later. "Governor," Professor Williams prompted. "What it's looked like from my side," Marcus said slowly, "is waiting. Waiting to see if this is real or performance. Waiting to see if Brian Reynolds is truly changing or just learning to say the right words. Because I've seen a lot of white people discover anti-racism after facing consequences. I've seen a lot of apologies that meant nothing, and I've learned that transformation is a process, not a moment." He looked at the screen at Reynolds. "But I've also learned that if we don't believe transformation is possible, then we're just warehousing people, cycling them through prisons and back into communities without ever addressing the root causes of harm. So, I'm waiting, Brian. I'm watching. And I'm hoping you prove that my faith in restorative justice wasn't misplaced." A police officer stood up in the audience, his uniform crisp, his face flushed with anger. "Governor, with all due respect, you're talking about one bad apple. But your legislation treats all of us like we're Brian Reynolds. It makes our jobs harder. It makes us second-guess split-second decisions. Officers are leaving the force because they don't want to be sued for doing their jobs." Marcus nodded slowly. I hear that concern, officer. I've heard it from a lot of good cops. But let me ask you something. When you see what Brian Reynolds did, when you watch that video of him handcuffing me without cause, traumatizing my children, does that make you angry? Of course it does. Why? The officer seemed taken aback. Because it's wrong. Because that's not what we're supposed to do. Exactly. It's wrong. It's against your oath, against your training, against everything the badge is supposed to represent. So why should accountability for that wrongdoing make you uncomfortable? If you're doing your job right, if you're treating everyone with dignity, regardless of their skin color, then body cameras protect you. Civilian oversight protects you. You should want these reforms because they separate good cops from bad cops. But what about the split-second decisions? The officer pressed. What about when we have to act fast and there's no time for committees and review boards? Then you act, Marcus said simply. But afterward, if your actions resulted in someone's death or serious injury, there should be a thorough independent investigation. Not to punish good faith mistakes, but to identify patterns to provide better training to ensure that split-second decisions are informed by proper procedure rather than racial bias. That's not anti-cop, that's pro-accountability. And it should be pro-cop too, because it helps you do your jobs better. Reynolds's voice came through the speakers. Can I say something? Professor Williams nodded. Go ahead. I want to speak directly to the officers here tonight, to my former brothers and sisters in blue. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking I'm a traitor, that I've sold out, that I'm saying what Governor Bennett wants to hear to reduce my sentence. But I'm telling you the truth. The culture that trained me to see black people as threats, that taught me better to be judged by 12 than carried by 6. That culture killed my career and nearly killed an innocent man. It's killing our community's trust in us. It's killing our own humanity. He leaned forward intense. The Public Safety and Accountability Act isn't your enemy. Your enemy is the voice in your head that tells you to see skin color before humanity. Your enemy is the training that prioritizes dominance over de-escalation. Your enemy is the union rep who tells you to lie on reports to protect bad cops. That's what's making our jobs harder and more dangerous. Not accountability, not reform, our own refusal to confront the truth about how we police. The room erupted in arguments. Some officers walked out, others nodded reluctantly. The audience divided along invisible lines of experience and perspective, each person processing through their own lens of trauma or privilege. Marcus let the chaos settle before speaking again. I know this is uncomfortable. Change always is. But the alternative is unacceptable. The alternative is more George Floyds, more Breonna Taylors, more traffic stops that end in tragedy. The alternative is my son Jordan, brilliant and kind and full of potential, being afraid every time he sees flashing lights. The alternative is my daughter Maya, writing poetry about whether her skin color will protect or condemn her. I won't accept that alternative, and neither should you. Professor Williams checked her notes. We're going to open this up to more audience questions, but first I want to ask something I think many people are wondering. Governor Bennett, there are rumors you're considering a run for U.S. Senate. If elected, would you take this fight national? Marcus smiled slightly. I haven't made any official announcements yet, but yes, I'm considering it. Because what happened to me, what happens to families across this country every day, that's not a Georgia problem. That's an American problem. And it needs American solutions. The crowd erupted in applause and protests simultaneously. Marcus raised his hand for quiet. But before I make any decisions about the future, I need to see the present through. I need to see the Public Safety and Accountability Act fully implemented. I need to see whether the changes we've made actually create the safer, more just Georgia I promised. And I need to see, he looked at the screen at Reynolds, whether the restorative justice model we're piloting actually works. Because if it does, it could change everything about how we think about crime and punishment in this country. A young man stood, maybe 19 or 20, his voice shaking with emotion. Governor Bennett, my brother was killed by police 3 years ago. He was unarmed, reaching for his wallet like they asked. The officer said he feared for his life. No charges were ever filed. How is your act supposed to help families like mine? How does it bring my brother back?" Marcus stood and walked to the edge of the stage, his heart breaking for this stranger's pain. "It doesn't. Nothing can bring your brother back, and I'm profoundly sorry for your loss. What this act does is try to prevent the next family from experiencing what you experienced. It won't be perfect. It won't save everyone. But if it saves some, if it holds some officers accountable, if it changes some outcomes, then it's worth fighting for. Your brother's life mattered. His death should mean something. Let it mean change." The young man sat down, tears streaming down his face. Around him, others were crying too, mothers who'd lost sons, fathers who'd buried daughters, siblings who carried the weight of survival guilt. Reynolds's voice cut through the moment. "I want to say something to that young man and everyone else who's lost someone to police violence. I can't speak for the officer who killed your brother, but I can tell you that I was capable of the same thing. If circumstances had been slightly different that morning, if Governor Bennett had reached for something I perceived as a weapon, if my fear and prejudice had combined with adrenaline, I could have killed him. And I would have justified it afterward. I would have said I feared for my life. I would have believed it too. That's how insidious this is." He paused, struggling with emotion. "So when I say I'm sorry, I'm not just sorry for what I did. I'm sorry for every officer who's killed without cause and never faced justice. I'm sorry that the system I was part of values our lives over yours. I'm sorry that I feared for my life has become a get-out-of-jail-free card, and I'm committed to spending whatever time I have left making sure other officers don't follow the path I took." The forum continued for another 90 minutes, with questions ranging from practical implementation details to philosophical debates about the nature of justice. But the moment that would be replayed on every news channel, the moment that would define the evening, came near the end. A woman stood elderly and dignified, her voice carrying the weight of decades. "I marched with Dr. King in Selma. I've been fighting for justice for 60 years, and I've seen a lot of white people discover racism after it costs them something. Officer Reynolds, I need to know, are you sorry because you got caught? Or are you sorry because you understand what you did was wrong?" The room went silent. Everyone leaned forward, waiting for Reynolds's answer. "Ma'am," Reynolds said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I wish I could tell you I understood from the beginning. I wish I could say that the moment I put those handcuffs on Governor Bennett, I realized the horror of what I was doing. But I didn't. I understood when I lost my job. I understood when the whole country called me a racist. I understood when I was sitting in county jail facing 25 years, realizing my life was over." He took a shaky breath. "So yes, initially I was sorry because I got caught. But this past year, sitting with the reality of what I did, listening to stories from men I brutalized, understanding the generational trauma of policing in black communities. Now, I'm sorry because I understand. I'm sorry because I see the full weight of harm I caused. I'm sorry because I can't undo it. Can't take back the fear in those children's eyes, can't give Governor Bennett back his sense of safety in the world." Tears ran down his face. "I'm sorry. Because I finally understand that I was the villain. Not the hero, not the victim, the villain. And that knowledge is something I'll carry every day for the rest of my life." The elderly woman studied him through the screen, her eyes sharp and assessing. Finally, she nodded once. "Then do something with that knowledge, young man. Don't just carry it. Use it. Make it mean something." As the forum ended and the crowd dispersed, Marcus found himself surrounded by well-wishers and critics, by people wanting to thank him and people wanting to challenge him. But through the crowd, he saw his children making their way toward him, and everything else fell away. Jordan reached him first, throwing his arms around his father. "That was incredible, Dad. You gave him a chance to be human again." Maya followed, more reserved but no less moved. "Daddy, do you think he really changed?" Marcus pulled both children close. I think he's changing. Whether he completes that change, whether it lasts, that's up to him. But we gave him the opportunity. That's all we can do. Over the following months, as Marcus officially announced his Senate campaign and crisscrossed the state, sharing his vision for justice reform, the impact of that forum rippled outward in ways he couldn't have anticipated. Maya's poem, Watching Daddy, was featured in a documentary about police reform and went viral all over again, this time reaching 20 million views. Young people across the country began reciting it at protests at school assemblies, at dinner tables, where difficult conversations about race finally began to happen. Jordan's Know Your Rights ATL expanded to 32 cities, teaching thousands of young people how to protect themselves during police encounters. Marcus attended a session in Augusta and watched his 13-year-old son teach teenagers about their constitutional rights with a clarity and passion that left the adults in the room in tears. The Public Safety and Accountability Act's first-year results exceeded even Marcus's optimistic projections. Use of force incidents dropped 42%. Civilian complaints decreased by 38% as officers modified their behavior, knowing they were being recorded. Most surprisingly, officer injuries during interactions with suspects dropped by 29%, suggesting that de-escalation training was making everyone safer. But the most profound moment came 9 months after the forum, when Marcus received an invitation he never expected. The Georgia Police Academy was graduating its first class trained entirely under the new protocols established by the Public Safety and Accountability Act. Among the graduates was Marcus's nephew, Terrence Bennett, a young man who'd grown up idolizing his uncle and had decided to become part of the change from within the system. Marcus stood at the podium in the Academy's auditorium, looking out at 200 fresh faces representing the future of law enforcement in Georgia. He saw black faces and white faces, men and women, young people who'd chosen this profession not despite the reforms, but because of them. When I was handcuffed on the side of the road 18 months ago, Marcus began, I thought about giving up. I thought about all the times I'd fought for justice only to watch it slip away. I thought about all the reforms that had failed, all the promises that had been broken. But then I looked at my children's faces, and I knew I couldn't give up. Not on them. Not on the possibility that things could be different. He paused, his eyes finding Terrence in the third row. Each of you chose to enter law enforcement during one of the most challenging times in its history. You chose it knowing you'd be held accountable, knowing you'd be recorded, knowing you couldn't hide behind the badge if you violated someone's rights. And that tells me you're exactly the kind of officers we need. He walked to the edge of the stage. The badge you're about to receive is not a weapon. It's not a license for dominance. It's a responsibility, a sacred trust between you and the community you've sworn to serve. Every time you put on that uniform, you're making a choice to see humanity, or to see threats, to de-escalate, or to dominate, to protect, or to control. His voice grew stronger. I won't lie to you. You'll face situations where you're scared, where your training will be tested, where split-second decisions will have lasting consequences. But you've been given something your predecessors weren't: tools to make those decisions better. Training that prioritizes life over force. Systems that hold you accountable while also protecting you from false accusations. And most importantly, you've been given the truth about the harm policing has done to communities of color, so you can be part of healing that harm instead of perpetuating it. He looked out at the sea of faces, seeing hope and determination, and yes, a little fear. Good. They should be a little afraid. The job deserved that respect. Officer Brian Reynolds is serving his sentence right now, participating in rehabilitation programming that's being studied as a model for the entire country. He made a choice to see my skin color before he saw my humanity. And that choice cost him everything. I'm asking you to make a different choice. Every single day, in every single interaction, make a different choice. The graduation ceremony proceeded with the typical formalities, but when Terrence crossed the stage to receive his badge, Marcus was the one who handed it to him. Uncle and nephew locked eyes, and in that moment, a silent promise passed between them. Make me proud, Marcus whispered. I will, Terence replied. I'll make all of us proud. 3 weeks later, Marcus stood on another stage. This one in a crowded Atlanta hotel ballroom, watching election results roll in on enormous screens. The Senate race had been closer than anyone had predicted. His opponent had run on a law and order platform promising to stop the anti-police crusade and restore respect for law enforcement. But as the final precincts reported, the numbers told a different story. Marcus Bennett had won by 6 points, carrying not just urban Atlanta, but suburban counties that hadn't voted Democratic in decades. The coalition that had elected him was broad and diverse. Black voters who'd lived with police brutality for generations, white progressives who believed in reform, and surprisingly, a significant number of police officers who'd seen the benefits of the new system firsthand. Tanya stood beside him on stage, Jordan and Maya on his other side, as he prepared to give his victory speech. Before walking to the microphone, he pulled his family close. "None of this matters if we lose ourselves in the process," he told them. "If we become bitter or vengeful, or forget why we started this fight, promise me we'll stay grounded." "We promise," they said in unison, and Marcus believed them. His victory speech was brief, focused not on his win, but on the work ahead. He spoke about taking Georgia's model national, about transforming how America thinks about policing and justice and accountability. He spoke about Brian Reynolds and the possibility of redemption. He spoke about his children and the future they deserved. But the moment that made headlines around the world came at the end, when Marcus made an unexpected announcement. "Tomorrow morning, I'm going to visit someone I've been corresponding with for the past several months. Someone whose transformation, if real, could teach us all something about the possibility of change. I'm going to visit Brian Reynolds in prison, and I'm going to shake his hand." The room erupted in gasps and shouts. Some people cheered. Others looked horrified. Marcus raised his hand for quiet. "I'm not doing this for the cameras. I'm doing it because restorative justice isn't just a theory. It's a practice. And if I'm asking this country to embrace it, I need to model it. Brian Reynolds nearly killed me. He traumatized my family. He represented everything wrong with policing in America. But he's also spending every day trying to become better. And that effort deserves acknowledgement, even if forgiveness is still a long way off." The next morning, with a small media pool following at a respectful distance, Marcus walked into the medium security facility where Reynolds was housed. He'd prepared himself for this moment, rehearsed what he'd say, how he'd act. But when he entered the meeting room and saw Reynolds standing there, thinner, grayer, but with clear eyes and a straight spine, all the preparation fell away. They stood facing each other for a long moment, separated by 3 feet and 18 months and a chasm of pain that might never fully close. "Governor Bennett," Reynolds said quietly. "Senator-elect Bennett, thank you for coming." "Brian," Marcus acknowledged with a nod. After everything, I never thought you'd actually want to see me." "I didn't want to," Marcus said honestly. "But I needed to. For myself, for my family, for everyone watching to see if transformation is real or just a nice idea." Reynolds nodded slowly. "I've been in therapy for 14 months. I've read 47 books on race and justice and the history of policing. I've sat in circles with men whose lives I destroyed and listened to their stories until I really understood what I was part of. And you know what I learned? What? That I can never undo what I did. I can't give your children back their innocence. I can't erase the fear I put in your eyes. I can spend the rest of my life changing, growing, becoming a better person, and it still won't undo the harm. That's the hardest truth I've had to face." Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a knot of anger he'd been carrying beginning to loosen. Not dissolve, that would take more time if it happened at all, but loosen. "So, what are you going to do with that knowledge?" Marcus asked. "I'm going to teach. They've asked me to help develop curriculum for the new bias training programs, to speak to police academies about what not to become, to be a living example of how good intentions without self-examination can lead to terrible harm. Reynolds paused. And I'm going to keep working on myself every day because that's all I can control. Marcus studied him, looking for signs of performance or manipulation, but all he saw was a man carrying the weight of his own conscience, trying to build something meaningful from the rubble of his destroyed life. I'm not ready to forgive you, Marcus said clearly. Maybe I never will be, but I acknowledge that you're trying to change. And in a country that often offers no second chances, especially to people who've caused harm, I want to be someone who believes change is possible. Not easy, not guaranteed, but possible. He extended his hand. Reynolds looked at it for a long moment, then slowly reached out and grasped it. The handshake was brief, professional, witnessed by cameras that would carry the image around the world. It wasn't friendship. It wasn't forgiveness. It was acknowledgement of harm caused of work done of the long road still ahead. As Marcus left the prison, reporters shouted questions at him. He ignored them all, climbing into his car where Tanya waited. She didn't ask how it went. She just took his hand and held it as they drove back to Atlanta in silence. That night, Marcus sat in his home office, looking at the photograph on his desk, the one from the science fair taken just hours before the traffic stop, showing him laughing with Jordan and Maya, all of them innocent and happy and unaware of what was coming. He couldn't go back to that innocence. None of them could. But maybe, just maybe, they could move forward to something better. A world where his children didn't have to fear the people sworn to protect them. A world where officers like Terrence could serve with honor and accountability. A world where even someone like Brian Reynolds could face the truth about himself and choose to change. Maya appeared in the doorway, her notebook in hand. "Daddy, I wrote something new. Want to hear it?" "Always, baby girl." She cleared her throat and began reading, her voice strong and clear. "I used to think justice meant punishment, that wrong plus consequence equaled right. But I'm learning it's more complicated. That healing takes more than just fighting. My daddy taught me that power isn't about revenge or hate. It's about believing people can change, even when change comes too late. To fix what's broken, even when forgiveness is too far to reach. It's about building something better from the pieces left behind." Marcus felt tears slip down his cheeks. "That's beautiful, Maya. That's exactly right." "Do you think Officer Reynolds read this one too?" she asked. "Maybe. Does it matter?" She thought for a moment. "I think it matters that I wrote it. Whether he reads it or not, I needed to say it. For me." "That's my girl," Marcus said, pulling her into a hug. "Always speak your truth." As the weeks turned to months and Marcus prepared to take his seat in the U.S. Senate, the story of what happened on that September morning continued to reverberate through the country. 6 more states adopted versions of the Public Safety and Accountability Act. Federal legislation was introduced bearing Marcus's name, proposing similar reforms nationwide. Police academies across America began using Reynolds' story in their training as a cautionary tale about unchecked bias. But perhaps the most profound impact was on the families who'd experienced similar trauma. They saw in Marcus's story a blueprint for fighting back, for demanding change, for refusing to let their pain be meaningless. Support groups formed. Advocacy organizations grew stronger. Young people organized, educated themselves about their rights, and demanded better from the systems meant to serve them. And Brian Reynolds, serving his sentence and participating in his rehabilitation with genuine commitment, became an unlikely symbol of the possibility that even the deepest prejudice, the most harmful behavior, could be confronted and changed with enough honesty, enough work, enough determination. On Marcus's last day as governor of Georgia, before heading to Washington to begin his Senate term, he gathered his staff in the Capitol rotunda. They'd fought together, bled together, built something that would outlast all of them. "What we did here," Marcus told them, his voice echoing in the grand space, "wasn't about me or my family or even about Brian Reynolds. It was about proving that real change is possible when we have the courage to demand it and the wisdom to implement it thoughtfully. Georgia showed America what justice with accountability looks like. Now we take that fight national. Patricia Chen, who'd agreed to join his Senate staff, raised her coffee cup in a toast. To justice, real justice, the kind that's hard and complicated and messy and absolutely necessary. To justice, they echoed. That evening, Marcus stood on the mansion's portico one last time, watching the sun set over Atlanta. Tanya joined him, slipping her hand into his. "Any regrets?" she asked. Marcus thought about everything that had happened since that September morning. The trauma, the fight, the victories, the ongoing struggle. He thought about Jordan, now 14, and a passionate advocate for civil rights. He thought about Maya, whose poetry had touched millions and who was already thinking about law school. He thought about Terrence patrolling the streets with honor and compassion. He even thought about Reynolds working every day to become someone worthy of the second chance he'd been given. "No regrets," Marcus said finally. "I wish it hadn't happened the way it did. I wish my children hadn't had to suffer, but I can't regret the change that came from it. The lives that will be saved because of the reforms we fought for. The officers who will be better because of the training we implemented. The families who won't have to experience what we experienced." "That's my husband," Tanya said softly, "always finding purpose in pain." "Someone has to," Marcus replied. "Otherwise, what's the point of any of it?" As they stood together watching the light fade from the sky, neither of them knew that history would remember this moment as a turning point. That textbooks would someday study the Public Safety and Accountability Act as a model for reform. That a simple traffic stop on a Saturday morning would become a catalyst for nationwide change. All they knew was that they'd fought for justice and won something precious. Not perfection, not total victory, but progress. Real, measurable, meaningful progress. And in a country still grappling with the legacy of racism and the challenge of building a more perfect union, progress was everything. Somewhere in a prison classroom, Brian Reynolds taught a group of inmates about implicit bias, sharing his own story as a cautionary tale. Somewhere in Atlanta, Jordan Bennett taught teenagers about their constitutional rights, empowering them to protect themselves and demand better. Somewhere online, Maya Bennett's poetry spread from person to person, planting seeds of understanding and empathy. And in Washington, D.C., Senator Marcus Bennett prepared to take his oath of office, ready to continue the fight he'd never asked for, but would never abandon. Because he'd learned something fundamental in that parking garage, facing a man with a knife and nothing left to lose. He'd learned that power without accountability was tyranny. That justice without mercy was vengeance. That change without compassion was just another form of oppression. And he'd learned that the hardest, bravest thing any of us can do is believe that people can change, systems can improve, and that tomorrow can be better than today, not because it's easy or guaranteed, but because it's necessary. The sun set on Atlanta, and somewhere across the city, lights came on in 1,000 windows, each one representing a family, a story, a struggle. Each one proof that the work continued, that the fight went on, that justice, real justice, was still worth fighting for. And that was enough. For now, it was enough.